Since our engine is still located at top dead center, number 1 cylinder, we can now install our distributor shaft and index it properly with the camshaft. We're going to install an old point type distributor in our engine. However, everything we show you now will also directly apply to the late model HEI electronic distributors. Let's take a closer look at the bottom end of our distributor where our driving gear is, which is also run off the camshaft. This gear is a gear that engages with the gear on the back end of the camshaft, and that gear is what drives the distributor. Looking at the bottom of our distributor shaft and up in this recess, we'll notice that there is a tang that runs across the diameter. That tang is what actually engages the notch in the top of our oil pump shaft that we installed earlier. That is how the distributor drives our oil pump. Due to the fact that this tang might not align properly with the slot when we drop our distributor in, the distributor may not drop fully into the block. We'll show you an easy way of correcting for this and getting proper indexing of our distributor in the block. Before we go to install our distributor, however, we want to first take some of our camshaft lube and apply it to the distributor gear. Also, we want to work a little bit up into the bottom of the shaft to lube the sides of the hole and the tang. Lastly, we want to take a new distributor housing gasket and place it up on the distributor all the way to the lower flange and lubricate that with some light grease. We're going to take our distributor now and install it in the engine. In the rear of the intake manifold is a large hole. This is where the distributor goes. We're not concerned about where it lines up at this point. We're just going to place it in the hole. At this point, if we take close notice to the bottom flange of the distributor where we put our gasket and the intake manifold, we'll see about a 1/2 of an inch gap, and the distributor does not want to move any closer. That's because we have not properly engaged the oil pump drive shaft with the tang in the bottom of the distributor shaft. What we want to do now is lift the distributor up just to the point where it disengages from the camshaft gear. As we did that, you notice that the rotor has turned slightly. If we take advantage of this slight movement, we can use it to move our oil pump shaft around in a clockwise manner to get it to the point we want it to be able to properly index the distributor in the engine. Looking up in our spec sheet, we'll also find a diagram showing proper firing order and proper positioning of the distributor for number 1 firing. Let's assume that the front of our block is at a 12 o'clock position and the back of the block being at 6 o'clock. We looked up in our specification book. Our distributor contact should be facing approximately 1 o'clock to be properly phased with a crankshaft. As we lift up the distributor, we just want to turn it a little bit at a time and drop it back in, 1 tooth at a time. Eventually, we'll arrive at a point where it engages the oil pump drive shaft and it will seat squarely in the block, as we've just done now, and seat flushly against the intake manifold. At this point, we've engaged our oil pump drive shaft and gotten full engagement of the distributor housing into the engine. However, our contact is not in the right relationship that we desire. By lifting the distributor slightly to the point where we've disengaged the drive gear, we should turn the contact 180 degrees from the position it was in before we lifted it back up. Let's take a closer look. We've reinstalled the distributor so that we're flush with the intake manifold. Noticing the reference of our contact, we want to now reinstall the contact facing this direction, 180 degrees out from its present location. Lifting the distributor up until it clears the cam gear, we'll rotate our contact 180 degrees and drop it back in. If you notice, we have re-engaged the distributor fully in the block because we're still in alignment with the opposite side of our drive shaft. Also notice that the rotor now, instead of pointing a full 180 degrees from our starting position, is slightly over. By repeating this process several times, we will move the pump shaft 1/2 tooth at a time clockwise and eventually arrive at our desired location. If you follow closely, you notice every time we complete this process, we are further and further to the number 1 position. The nice thing about using this method is that if you ever have to remove your distributor while it's in the car and it doesn't want to go back in where you took it out from, by aligning your harmonic balancer, your timing reference marks, with a scale on the front cover to 0 and checking through your spark plug hole to make sure you're at top dead center number 1, you can easily re-index the distributor in the block. At this point, we've arrived at our desired location, and we can continue with preparing our engine to go back in the car. We remove the engine from the engine stand and place it on a work table. If you don't have a suitable work table, you can also rest the engine on its oil pan on the floor, being sure to first lay down a wooden block at the front and rear of the oil pan to keep the pan from being bent or distorted. If we look closely, we can see the back of our camshaft. This shiny thin metal edge is our camshaft bearing, and this recess is where the camshaft rear oil plug will be installed. This rear plug is a thin expansion plug which is pressed into place. If we take a closer look at the thickness of our cam plug, we'll notice it's approximately 1/3 the depth of our recess. We do not want to install the plug so far that the face of the plug comes in contact with the camshaft. This could cause an oil leak, or definitely will wind up removing metal from the camshaft plug and embedding it in our camshaft bearing, possibly causing bearing failure. To remove all oil and any other matter from the recess. Using high-tack, we want to put a light coat all the way around the recess for about a 1/4 inch depth. We don't want to go any closer to the camshaft bearing than this. We also want to apply a similar coat completely around the edge of the plug and move it into the recess area. We're going to have to hold it here, and by taking a socket, a large socket that will fit freely inside the cam plug, but almost the same in size, so that we install the plug by putting pressure toward the outside edge. You want to, by eye, line up the edge of the plug so it's equidistant from the face of the rear of the block. We'll take our hammer now and lightly start driving this plug into place, trying to keep it square to the back face of the block. To ensure that the rear plug is squarely placed in the bore, we can take a small machinist scale or a ruler, set it for approximately 1/8 of an inch, and measure from the back face of the block to the edge of the cam plug all the way around to make sure that we have it square in the bore. If not, we'll have to compensate and square it by applying more pressure to either one side or the other to balance our dimensions. Our major engine assembly is now complete and pre-adjusted for initial starting. At this point, what still remains is installation of our valve covers, carburetor, water pump, and other external accessories, some of which can be installed at this time, others of which have to be reinstalled after the engine has been relocated in the engine compartment of your vehicle. Also keep in mind that whenever starting a new engine with a new camshaft, or any engine with a new camshaft, you should first make sure that your oil and water levels are at full capacity, because once you've started the engine, it should remain running at no less than 1500 and no more than 2000 RPM for at least 20 minutes to ensure a proper break-in of your camshaft. This information is also stated with your new camshaft installation instructions. We wish you the greatest success and long, happy engine life. How's that?